Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I am your host Sri Iyer, and today I have with me Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma ji from the United Kingdom. Pandit ji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Sri Iyer ji, pranam, namaskar. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. We've had a very interesting week on a number of very serious issues as well, so it'll be good to talk about them. They do affect our community here in the UK and indeed the diaspora community over in India as well.
So before we plunge into a rather weighty subjects today, I request all our viewers to please subscribe to our channel if you have not already done so. We are inching towards the 100,000 mark. We are set to reach a million mark, and it would help us greatly because at that point we'll be able to continue to bring you quality content. Thank you very much. And with that, let's proceed on to our topic of the day. Panditji, looks like England also has a problem similar to what happened in United States. That is the depiction of Hinduism in the school textbooks. So what is happening, sir? And is it accurate in your opinion what has been described about Hinduism?
It's a great point to start on. Remember, Britain declares that it has a very special relationship with India. And every time there's an Independence Day, there's a very strange exchange of celebrations, shall we say. You know, on the one hand, you have the oppressed, colonized. On the other hand, you have the colonizers. And everybody refuses to confront the elephant in the room, that it was not a good relationship. And so by pretending nothing happened, everyone tries to move forward. But what we see from time to time cropping up is the old colonialist habits of denigrating Sanatana Dharma, of criticizing and trying to vilify and demean anything to do with India, and certainly anything to do with Hinduism on a regular basis. So what happened recently was in the education sector. In this country, the religious education is guided by a religious education council. And if I recall, it was headed once by our dear friend Lord Harries of the caste legislation debacle. He was a significant force in it, but no longer there. And as far as I can recall, there are no Hindus on the board of this REC. And yet, you know, there is a lot of talk about diversity. What really happened with that as the background was that a Hindu parent looked into the RE religious education teaching textbook that his child brought home and spotted some statements about Hinduism which were unbelievably offensive and factually incorrect. And, you know, when you think of Sanatana Dharma, we have a vast array of literature, of scriptures, writings that you could pick amazing stories from to teach children and share with them the colors and the beauty. And I put this together just to emphasize that point. That, you know, we have the Vedas with 20,000 plus verses, the Mahabharata, which has got over 1.8 million words, the Ramayana, 24,000 verses, the Puranas, the Upanishads. There are just so many that you could choose from. Colorful tales, colorful stories, parables. And yet, what the textbook authors decided was better and something that they wanted to have was quite remarkable. Let me show you so that the viewers can see this. This is the textbook. Actually, it's a mainstream religious studies, nice and colorful, attractive for children. But the things to note is it's from AQA. The AQA logo is all over the place, and that is the largest examination body in the country. So this is a genuine, formal, widely distributed RE book. When you look inside, there's a statement. In India, there have been examples of religious intolerance against Muslims and Christians which left people dead. 2015 proved a sad year in this respect. These are in direct contrast to what Hinduism teaches, tolerance and respect. What a completely unbalanced, irrelevant statement to make when you bear in mind the atrocities that the Anglicans inflicted upon Hindus whilst they were doing their Raj. You know, 45 trillion extorted and stolen, and then 80 million lives lost. And yet when they're teaching the RE syllabus, this is the one thing that they could choose and find for us. So that caused a significant amount of offence. And then people started to have a look to see what else was going on in this particular book. Another little phrase. So they're talking about Arjuna, the Kshatriya, and the duty to uphold a righteous cause. And then all of a sudden it leaps to self-defense is justifiable. Hence, India has nuclear weapons to protect from aggressors. Some Hindus have turned to terrorism to protect Hindu beliefs. And again, this is England, the island. England has nuclear weapons. You know, for heaven's sake, we have 23 bishops who sit in the House of Lords. The dominant state-approved religion is Christianity. And so one could make similar conclusions, if not worse conclusions, about Britain having nuclear weapons to support its Christianity. And when you bear in mind the illegal war in Iraq, you know, it's not too difficult to make links there to say that it was a Christian war. So this is a textbook. And what happened is the parents decided to publicize this and got to Twitter. And it was just so reassuring to see and watch how our community suddenly started to notice these things and to start sharing them, to start talking to each other about them. Within 24 hours, the school had immediately apologized to the parents and everybody else, withdrew the book from circulation in the school. The publishers, the examination board, AQA, they immediately denied any knowledge of the book. They said, no, our logos were used without our knowledge. And this is a book that's been in circulation for 4 years and widely distributed throughout the schools of the country. But they decided to do an investigation. And then the actual publishers immediately froze distribution and sales of the book. But we're going to see what else happens, because this has been in circulation for a long period of time. It's not enough to stop harming a community. You have to also take some remedial action. You have to put something into place. So we're waiting to see what happens. This has all happened in the last 48 hours. So it's a good start. And it's lovely to see, you know, the joke we make, shush, Hindu so raha hai. But apparently, Hindu jag raha hai. And that's a great development. So that's a good news.
Sir, one personal observation. I have started moving away from calling myself as a Hindu. I prefer to call myself as a Sanatani, because I feel like that is a more accurate description of who I am. I'm a follower of Sanatana Dharma, which is Sanatana is eternal, and Dharma is one of the meanings of Dharma. Dharma is what is just, what is right. Another way people define Dharma is dharayati iti dharma, something that flows. So we are part of an eternal flow. That's another way to look at it. So that's how I consider myself. We're all human beings first. And there is much to learn from Sanatana Dharma. One of the things that I have done a little bit of research is the Taittiriya Upanishad. And in the Taittiriya Upanishad, there is a section where the children who are graduating, or students who are graduating and about to face the real world, are being advised by the Guru. He says, Matru Devo Bhava, Pitru Devo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava, Atithi Devo Bhava. So what he is saying is respect for mom, then father, then your Guru, and then your guest. Now, there is no religion here. So, likewise, if you look at any of the teachings, whether the Vedas or the Upanishads or even, any other suktas, there is more of moral, what exactly should you conduct, how you conduct yourself, what exactly is life, the meaning of life, and so on. So I think rather than trying to draw that aspect of the Dharma, looks like people have done a real hatchet job here.
Well, it's difficult to understand how a country with such an elaborate religious education infrastructure could actually let something like this through. And now everybody is throwing up their hands in horror, saying, oh, no, we don't know how it happened. It's terrible. We'll make sure it never happens again. But that's the old bureaucrat's defense, isn't it? Oh, we're learning lessons and we're putting processes and procedures. But there has to be restitution. There has to be some degree of repairing the harm that's done, and we'll see. And what you've said about Dharma is absolutely right. I think one of the most important things is that we define what Dharma is for ourselves. In the past, other people have defined what Dharma is according to their very reductionist, limited, relatively unevolved understanding of these things. So yes, Dharma is nothing to do with religion. It's much more expansive, and I'm really looking forward that to see us separate ourselves from the faith peg, the square peg in a round hole that they always stick us into. That's going to be happening more and more. But this is the beginning of Hindus beginning to say, actually, no more gaslighting. We're going to self-define and put our own vocabulary and our own terms into circulation. It's a wonderful, wonderful development from that point of view.
Yes, sir. And I also would advise all of you who are watching this to try and read up on Taittiriya Upanishad, third Upanishad. And in continuing with what I was saying, the Guru says to the Sishya, just one line, and this one line can be your barometer for life. Satyam vada dharman chara. That means speak the truth, do what is right. And it's such simple Sanskrit that he uses to, that is used to depict this stuff. It's an incredible, and if you recite it once a day, it's only 10-15 minutes. I'm sure all of us can do it, because there's another section there that talks about the grammar of Sanskrit. It's just incredible. If you think about, millions of lines and, so many other things, and all that concise and given you in a small capsule that if you can just imbibe that, it sets you a platform to realize what more is there, what treasure is there. Sorry, I'm diverging a little bit. I've been just amazed by this.
Yeah, you are more than entitled to enjoy reveling in any of the Upanishads. It's quite an amazing one. But one other thing that your thoughts have brought to my mind is that the beauty that you've been talking about is something that flowed all over Europe. When Europe became connected with India, the knowledge that came from India, the beautiful ways of looking at things, a whole generation of philosophers came into being. But what happens, I've noticed, is that after a period of time, the old church starts to introduce its vilification, its denigration, and slowly over a period of a couple of decades, we're back to the same place where those tropes that the church used to peddle about dark heathens and their uncivilized demonic ways, suddenly they all come back to the front again, and the populations of Europe are in that same situation where they're criticizing and looking down with a degree of uninformed arrogance upon the beauty of what the Sanatana Dharma civilization brought. And so when I looked at it, this textbook from that point of view, it struck me that this is actually just a continuation of an old policy. They bide their time, and when they can, sneak in a few of these little things, nobody notices, but suddenly 4 years worth of children have passed through schools reading these ideas and taking them on board. And so it's entirely unacceptable. Let's see how we manage to get justice from this.
And it is imperative that, the powers that may be start putting some dharmic scholars who are really, really aware of what it is. And these dharmic scholars must be somebody that should have the collective approval of the community, so that they know that this person, if he's in the board or she's in the board, they truly represent our beliefs. And I hope something like that happens. Certainly this government has been much more receptive. So let's put it out there and hope for the best. I know we always give out unsolicited advice. Sometimes it's actually good advice too.
It is. And in this case, I'm totally in agreement with you. I think as Britain moves into the 21st century, that old colonialist habit of having house Hindus, sort of Hindus who have been brought in to toe the government line and to fit in and not sort of cause any problems. I call them religious eye candy, where you sort of bring them in so that you can parade them to the whole world and the community to say, oh, look how diverse we are. But it's diversity in appearance, not diversity in substance, and definitely not diversity in thought or philosophy. But we are moving away from it slowly. And I think the more vocal and active our community becomes, the better it will be for everybody. We will have genuine diversity after a period of time.
Yes, indeed, sir. And let's hope that that happens. And moving on to the next topic, I am also reading that the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, a body that is approved by the government, has come out with a new report. And that seems to have some very critical observations of the Church of England.
Yes, you're right. If I can wind the clock back, way back in 2015, myself and a few other religious people, shall we say, we convened a meeting in the House of Commons and invited representatives from all of the religious traditions, the faith groups as well. And we wanted to talk about the abuse of religious authority. It was apparent, and everybody had known that this has been going on for such a long period of time. One of the panel speakers was a lawyer who's been acting on behalf of survivors of clergy abuse from the Church of England for 17 years. And we had the event, an awful lot of people attended who were actually survivors. And it was apparent that this is a very deeply rooted, endemic, and institutionally protected problem. At the end of that event, we had a conversation about a number of things, but one of the conclusions was that the Church of England had to allow external audit or external scrutiny or external monitoring and governance of this issue, because it had repeatedly failed to actually protect vulnerable adults and minors. And not only that, it had actually gone to the extent of concealing and looking after the interests of the church's reputation and indeed its own clergy at the expense of the victims. And so that was way back in 2015. Just on a little note, I recall that the one tradition that refused to come to that meeting was in fact the Church of England. At the very last minute, they cancelled and said, no, we're not going to participate. And here we are 5 years later, and the government commissioned this report, and the report is damning. I think almost 400 clerics were identified as having inflicted abuse on people who had entrusted their well-being to them, over 2,000 cases. And one of the things that this report repeatedly established was, again, the culture of protect the church at all costs, protect our own clerics at all costs, and wherever possible, try and discourage, demean, or prevent the abused, the victims, from actually seeking justice and finding peace and reconciliation. A very, very damning report. And this was announced only a couple of days ago, released a couple of days ago. So I've had a read through it, and there are a couple of other points that are probably worth bringing out. So I was invited to contribute to this report, and I went and met the panel of lawyers, barristers, and experts who were going to be conducting this report. And I wanted to understand the scope of the report. Bear in mind, this is the 5th inquiry into this particularly unpleasant aspect of British life, and the previous 4 had all been inconclusive. I wasn't confident that there would be a conclusion that would actually move the game forward and move the issue forward to resolution. So I was quite skeptical when I attended this briefing. And when we started to engage, they started to inquire about the Hindu institutions, the manner in which the Hindu community, the religious community, the temples, paramparas, and everything else, how do they work? How do they deal with this? What safeguards are in place, etc., etc., etc. And I listened and observed, and it struck me that on the one hand, we have a massive institution, which is the dominant force in schooling in this country. It has access to huge numbers of vulnerable children at a very early age. It has a history of concealing abuses. It has so many cases which have made the public light of highly placed officials being protected for decades, and then in their dotage, in their older years, being found to have been guilty, but very little punishment. It's almost as though this institution had worked out a process whereby you could avoid justice. So on the one hand, we have this institution, and here they are talking to me about our own community, where this may go on, but the issue is that it's not institutionally established and it's not institutionally protected. And so I had a distinct feeling that this was a fishing trip. And we who have experienced the after effects of colonized civilizational harm, we recognize the means by which such institutions often seek to universalize a sin. If I give you an example, rather than speaking of, let's say, white supremacy, which is a problem of a particular group of people, let's talk about racism, which suddenly becomes universalized and it becomes a problem of the human race. So here in this meeting, I was experiencing an attempt to universalize a problem which is very particularly systemic in the Church of England. And when I shared my thoughts with them and my concerns that I did not want to participate in them engaging in a fishing trip into our community, I withdrew from the inquiry. And now, several months later, we have seen this report emerge, and it is damning. The Church has, well, it has a history of apologizing so skillfully. I have never seen individuals and persons apologize so regularly, so skillfully, and so piously. And it has already started the response to the report by apologizing in that manner.
Did the Church of England not issue an unqualified apology to the indigenous natives of Canada in a recent trip?
You're right. Again, this happened in 2015, I think it was, where the Anglican Communion, as it's called, they have such fancy names for their organization. I often study it. It's only a corporation, and if you put the fancy hats to one side and you get rid of the arcane titles like archdeacon, you know, they evoke a sense of mystique and so on and so forth. If you put them to one side, it's basically just a corporation peddling a product. And you're absolutely right. What had happened in the early years of the Canadian nation, I think 150,000 children were taken away from their parents and families and put into church-run schools. And the motto was, "Kill the Indian, save the child." So it was literally intended to brainwash them, to de-indigenize them, and to fill their heads with the mantras that the church was peddling. And if I recall, the Canadian government came to a settlement of some $800 million to those children who had this abuse inflicted upon them. So this is not an isolated incident. And I'm glad you brought it up, because the issue that has to be looked at is the issue of ideology, right? The very reason this institution exists is supposedly because human beings are born as sinners, and the church has some special understanding of the human condition whereby it can diminish our capacity to sin, such that if we comply with all of their instructions, we are given a visa to this place called heaven, where there are no Hindus, there are no Sikhs or anybody else, it's only Christians. Now, this is the product that they have been selling or peddling for a long period of time. And I have to ask the question, if it was so good, how come it didn't prevent almost 400 senior ranking clerics from perpetrating these obvious sins? And if it's not working on the people who have got some sort of moral issue, then of what value is it at all? It has absolutely zero value. And I think this is an understanding that the British public are certainly realizing. And they are leaving the Church of England in their droves. And it's long overdue. It's long overdue.
Yes, sir, I can understand that. And I think at this time, if I'd like to take your indulgence to explain a little bit about how Sanatana Dharma is very fundamentally different from the Abrahamic religions. You see, in Sanatana Dharma, when you go to the temple, you don't have to physically go to the temple. You can have your own temple in your own house. You can do your prayers to your God of choice. It's a very open architecture. It doesn't say only this is the God, that you shall only pray to this person. There is an option for you. Whoever you feel close with, you can do that. But let's say you go to a temple. What happens in a temple is you perform almost the first thing you do in front of your deity, your murti, your God. What you do is you do what is called a sankalpam. What it is you say who you are, which rishi you belong to, your lineage, and then I don't know what is the right word for priest. It's more like acharya, a
Pujari.
person who pujari. Thanks for that. The pujari essentially performs the puja. Essentially, what he's telling to the god is, here is this person, and this is what he's telling you, and that's what it is. He is essentially, because you and I don't know about you, at least I don't know the Sanskrit verses to do the puja myself. The pujari is essentially doing that, but it is a direct connect between you and your Bhagwan, your God. And so there is the role of the pujari is essentially that, perform the puja. That's why he's called one who performs puja as a pujari. Thanks for that. I mean, I'm now beginning to connect the dots here. And the reason why a temple is established in a certain direction, in a certain way, in a certain place, with a certain importance, these have a lot of significance. Sanatana Dharma is perhaps the most scientific religion, and it has been trivialized. Sadly, a lot of people living in India also have joined on to this chorus without realizing what they are destroying. But the point I'm trying to make here is there's a fundamental difference between this Sanatana Dharma and others. So you're going to say something.
Yes, that's a great segue into perhaps just sharing two things that make our approach to Paramatma different. One is we view the human being as sacred, not ideas. The human being is sacred. Ideas, we're not concerned about ideas. We are free to look at ideas, to burn them up and get rid of them and move on to better ideas. So the first is that we find the human being to be the most sacred of all creatures. And the second thing is that we're not bound by beliefs. We're not required to believe anything at all. We're required to experiment and learn from the experimentation process. So we are seekers who value the human being in its highest form. We're not believers who value ideas above the sanctity of a human being. And those are the two most important differences that make everything completely different. So that is why we are Sanatan.
Absolutely. And viewers, if some of you poke fun at your grandma counting the beats, which happen to be 108 in number, please do watch PGurus videos. It's explained in great detail, the significance of the number 108. And sir, go ahead.
You know, we've just been talking about this institution, which is built on beliefs, that you must believe these ideas. And they're beliefs that are drummed into you when you're a child and you haven't developed the faculty of reason and analysis for yourself. And so you let them sink deeply into you. There is a problem, and we've seen now with this report that this product, these set of ideas don't work. Now, only a short while ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury declared that the Church of England is a deeply institutionally racist organization. Now we have a report which says not only is it racist, but what it also does is it has concealed for decades the abuse of vulnerable children in its care. Now those are very damning, undisputed facts now. We have just recently seen how Bharat has ejected Amnesty International. Now, Amnesty International's transgressions were relatively minor compared to the transgressions of this institution. Personally, I think Bharat and other nations have every right under the United Nations declarations to review these institutions, to understand and assess the true nature of their activities in these countries, and to find out, is it the same profile of the church in its own nation state? And if it is, this institution, until it has put its own house in order, should rightly be denied access to these other nations. And I think that's a project that somebody should take up and enforce. Otherwise, we too may find that we have thousands of children in India who are actually on the receiving end of the abuse and racism that this institution's senior most people acknowledge and agree exists.
Yes, they do indeed. And we have had some people come on a hangout with PGurus to express some of these concerns from India. So this is something that's like a moving target. And I think more light will come out, more facts will emerge. There is a bigger problem of abuse of nuns. And that is also a clear and present problem there. And the clergy somehow manages to escape the clutches of law. Anyway, so these are happening and these are being addressed. Panditji, this was a wonderful discussion. I'm sorry if I took a segue into Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma for a little bit, but I felt that we need to, there is such depth there, there is such purpose there that it needs to be depicted right. If you are just going to devote 2 pages, please let us tell you what those 2 pages should contain. Thank you very much once again, and we'll be back with such enlightening conversations.
Sriji, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to share this very important development and teaching. So I'm hoping that people will take it on board and will share this recording after having obviously subscribed to your channel and tweeted it to everybody they can think of. This is news that needs to be circulated. So again, thank you for the wonderful opportunity to talk about these issues. Om Namah Shivaya. Om.
Namaskar.